The laughter came first, low muffled like the sound of champagne glasses clinking in a private joke. Olaf Green didn't understand it at first. The restaurant was too expensive, too polished, the kind of place that made men like him invisible. He had been wiping its marble floors for 3 years, never sitting at one of its tables until tonight. But now, under the golden chandeliers of the Hudson View, overlooking the Manhattan skyline, he sat across from a woman who looked like she belonged to another world entirely. She was stunning. Her skin was a deep, luminous shade of bronze, her posture sharp as if sculpted from discipline itself. The curve of her neck caught the light every time she turned her head, and her dress, a simple navy silk, looked like it had been poured on. When she finally spoke, her voice didn't rise, but it hit him like a slap. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Olaf blinked, startled. I'm sorry." Her eyes were dark and cutting, the kind of eyes that made men confess even when they didn't know what they'd done. "I'm Mariana Cooper," she said, each syllable deliberate, deadly. "Chief Executive Officer of Cooper Financial Holdings." He froze. He knew that name. Everyone at the company did. She was the youngest black female CEO on Wall Street, a legend of precision and power, the kind of woman who turned men like Gregory Pike into nervous schoolboys. But what was she doing here with him? He opened his mouth to ask, but then he saw it. The reflection of movement behind her in the glass wall that framed the glittering skyline. A table of men in tailored suits trying too hard to pretend they weren't watching. The flicker of a phone camera light. Gregory Pike, laughing. And in one brutal sinking second, Olaf understood. This wasn't a date. It was a setup. His stomach turned cold. The napkin fell from his lap as humiliation washed over him. They had sent him here like a performing monkey. The janitor from the 47th floor, dressed in his only clean shirt, sitting across from the CEO. A joke for their Friday night amusement. Mariana must have followed his gaze because her face hardened. "You know them?" He swallowed. "They're from the office. Finance team." Her jaw clenched, a small muscle twitching at the corner. Then she leaned back, eyes still locked on the men. Her voice dropped to a near whisper. "They set you up." "Yes. And me." He nodded once. A strange silence fell between them, not awkward, but electric. Outside, the city pulsed with life. Inside, the air felt razor thin. Olaf pushed back his chair. "I should go." "No." The word was soft, but carried the weight of command. She turned to face him fully. Now her chin lifted, her tone steady as tempered glass. "If you walk out, they win. Sit down, Mr. Green. Let's give them a show they'll never forget." Her confidence struck him harder than any insult. For a moment, he saw not just a CEO, but a woman refusing to be humiliated. And against every instinct screaming inside him, he sat back down. The waiter arrived, pretending not to notice the smirking executives. "Would you like to start with something to drink?" Mariana's smile was practiced perfection. "A glass of Pinot Noir. And for him..." She glanced at Olaf. He hesitated. "Just water." The waiter nodded and disappeared. Mariana leaned in, voice low. "Tell me, Mr. Green, what do you do for the company?" He hesitated, the words bitter on his tongue. "I'm the janitor." Something flickered in her eyes. Pity, surprise, maybe both, but it was gone before he could name it. "And they thought that was funny," she murmured, her gaze darting briefly toward the men's table. "Setting me up with a janitor." "I'm sorry," Olaf said quietly. "You didn't deserve this." Her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Neither did you." For a moment, they simply looked at each other. Two strangers forced into the same cruel joke. Then, from behind them, came the click of a phone camera. Mariana turned sharply, her voice suddenly cutting through the room like a blade. Gregory. The laughter stopped. Heads turned. Gregory Pike froze mid-grin, his phone halfway to his ear. Just taking a call, Ms. Cooper. Her voice dropped into something dangerously calm. Enjoy it while you can. It'll be your last at this company. He blanched, stammered, and slipped out of the restaurant. When she turned back to Olaf, something had changed in her expression. The icy distance had melted just a little. So she said softly, "What's your daughter's name?" He blinked. "How do you—" "Your hands," she said, nodding toward his fingers. "There's paint under your nails. Blue glittery. Kids' art supplies. You're a father." For the first time that night, Olaf smiled, a small broken thing that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Laya, she's 7. She's lucky," Mariana said, her tone gentler now. "You're here doing your best." He almost laughed. "Most days my best doesn't feel like much." She tilted her head, studying him. "You're wrong." There was something in her gaze, an understanding he didn't expect. For all her power, she looked tired, haunted. He saw the faint shadows under her eyes, the kind that come from too many sleepless nights and too many silent dinners. "My daughter's 5, she admitted softly. "Maya. She hasn't spoken in over a year." That confession hit him like a quiet earthquake. The noise of the restaurant faded into nothing. Two parents sitting in the wreckage of their own private storms, realizing without saying it that pain speaks the same language everywhere. The waiter returned with their drinks. Mariana lifted her glass, and for the first time that evening she smiled. Not the practiced CEO smile that belonged to headlines, but something fragile, human. "To cruel jokes," she said. He raised his water. "And to surviving them." Their glasses touched with a quiet chime, and in that sound, small as it was, something shifted. When the waiter left again, Olaf's phone buzzed. A message from his sister. "Laya's with me. Don't worry, she's fine." He exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing. Mariana noticed. "You're a good father," she said. He shook his head. "I'm just trying not to mess up more than I already have." "You're still here," she said simply. "That's what matters." The words hung between them, soft and dangerous. Outside, rain had begun to fall, streaking the windows with silver. The reflection of Manhattan shimmered like a dream, half remembered. Olaf looked at the woman across from him, the billionaire who was supposed to laugh at him, and saw instead a mother exhausted and alone, fighting battles no one saw. He didn't know what made him do it, but he reached for a sugar packet from the porcelain bowl at the center of the table. Carefully, he tore it open and poured a few grains onto the white linen tablecloth, arranging them into a tiny star. Then he dipped his finger in his water glass and let a droplet fall beside it. Mariana watched, puzzled. "It's something my daughter likes," he said quietly. "When the moon touches the star, it means the wish comes true." She stared at the little scene, the sugar dissolving into the droplet, and for the first time in months, she laughed, a small, incredulous laugh that sounded more like a sob. In that moment, the distance between CEO and janitor vanished. There were no titles, no suits, no humiliation, just two hearts that had forgotten what it felt like to be seen. And from the corner of the restaurant where no one dared to record anymore, the city lights reflected a single truth across the glass. Sometimes the cruelest joke is the one fate plays to bring the right souls together. As the night deepened over Manhattan, Olaf didn't know that this accidental dinner would change both their lives forever. He only knew one thing when Mariana smiled. Again, really smiled. It was worth every bruise pride could take. And somewhere far away, a little girl named Laya looked up at the moon, whispering to the night sky, "Make Daddy's wish come true." If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because somewhere out there, another soul might need to be reminded that even in the darkest places, kindness can still find its way home. Rain lingered long after midnight, threading down the windows of Olaf's tiny apartment in South Chicago. The city outside hummed with the distant rumble of traffic and the sigh of trains gliding along wet tracks. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dish soap and cinnamon toast, the last traces of his daughter's bedtime ritual. Leia's room was a chaos of color and imagination. Glitter pens rolled under the nightstand, paper stars dangled from string above her bed, and a plastic tiara lay forgotten beside her half-finished homework. Olaf stood quietly at the doorway, watching her chest rise and fall in soft rhythm. She slept with her arms wrapped around her favorite stuffed bear, a faded brown thing named Pancake, whose one remaining eye always seemed to be watching him, with judgment and affection all at once. He should have felt peace watching her like this, but the humiliation from that dinner refused to fade. It clung to him like the scent of bleach on his work uniform, something he couldn't wash away, no matter how many times he tried. He could still hear Gregory Pike's laughter echoing through the restaurant, the red light on that phone camera, the way his heart had clenched when he realized he'd been the punchline. And yet, when he closed his eyes, he didn't see Gregory. He saw her, Mariana Cooper. The way she'd turned that trap into a statement of defiance still haunted him. She had saved him from drowning in shame without even meaning to. And when she'd laughed, really laughed, not like a CEO, but like a woman rediscovering how it had undone something inside him he didn't know was still locked. He leaned his head against the wall, exhaling. "Forget it, Olaf," he muttered to himself. "She's from another world." Still, when he finally crawled into bed, the memory of her stayed, her voice low and strong, the way she said, "You're still here. That's what matters." He dreamed of the city lights and of sugar stars melting into water. Morning came with the shrill cry of his alarm and the soft patter of small feet. Leia appeared at his bedside, hair a wild halo, clutching Pancake by the arm. "Daddy, you're late again." He blinked at the clock. 7:30. "No way you promised pancakes today." He groaned, dragging himself upright. "I did, didn't I?" Pancake said so. She lifted the stuffed bear in solemn confirmation. "He said you break promises too much." Olaf laughed, despite the heaviness in his chest. Then Pancake's keeping score. As he flipped the batter in their tiny kitchen, Leia climbed onto the counter and swung her legs. "You look sad," she said suddenly. He hesitated. Children always knew. "Just tired." "From work, yeah." He hesitated, then added, "People weren't very nice last night." Her little face tightened, protective, in the way only children could be. "Did they laugh at you again?" His throat closed. It wasn't the first time she'd asked that. Leia had seen too much neighbors mocking his uniformed strangers, mistaking kindness for weakness. He knelt beside her. "Hey, don't worry about that, sweetheart. Some people laugh because they don't know how to see." She tilted her head. "See what? The good things, the small things, like the stars you make with sugar." He smiled. Exactly like that. When he dropped her off at school later, he lingered by the gate longer than usual. Watching her run toward her friend's pink backpack, bouncing ponytail flying, was the only moment of every day that felt pure. But in a tall glass tower hundreds of miles away, another parent was fighting a very different kind of mourning. Mariana Cooper's penthouse overlooked the gray sprawl of Manhattan like a fortress. The glass walls reflected a woman composed of order and exhaustion. Her assistant was already waiting in the foyer, tablet in hand, reading off the day's schedule board meetings, media calls, and emergency with the Singapore branch. Mariana listened without really hearing. Her mind was still tangled in last night, the janitor, the cruel joke, the way he had looked at her without fear or condescension. It was absurd. She had been in rooms with presidents, hedge fund magnates, and power brokers who measured their self-worth in billions. None of them had looked at her the way that man had, like she was a person, not a headline. The thought made her stomach flutter, and she hated herself for it. Her daughter Maya sat silently at the breakfast bar, legs swinging beneath the stool. The nanny tried to coax her into eating with a soft voice. "Just one bite, sweetheart. Please." Maya shook her head, curls falling over her face. Mariana approached slowly, crouching, to meet her eye level. "Morning, baby." Maya didn't look up. Her hands toyed with the spoon, tracing invisible circles on the countertop. Mariana's chest ached. The specialists had said it's so clinically selective mutism, triggered by emotional trauma. They said the cure was consistency safety time. But consistency was a luxury in her world. She was always traveling, always busy, always missing. She brushed a hand over her daughter's hair. "Maybe after school we'll go to Central Park. The carousel?" Maya glanced up briefly, a flicker of something like longing crossing her face. Then she nodded barely. It was enough. By the time Mariana arrived at her office on Wall Street, the whispers had already spread. She could feel them like smoke in the air. Employees glanced up from their desks, eyes darting toward her, then away. She didn't need confirmation. She knew Gregory Pike. He'd spread the story how she'd been tricked into a date with a janitor, how the great Mariana Cooper had been fooled. Let them laugh, she thought coldly. Let them underestimate me. But beneath the armor of her tailored suit, a strange disquiet pulsed. She wasn't angry about the joke anymore. She was angry that she couldn't stop thinking about the man it had been played on. Later that evening, after Maya was tucked into bed, she poured herself a glass of wine and opened her phone. Her thumb hovered over the company directory. Green Olaf. The system listed him as custodial services, Night shift. No photo, just a line of data. She stared at it for a long time before setting the phone aside. What would he think if she called? He'd probably think she pitied him. And pity was something he'd reject more fiercely than an insult. But there had been something in his eyes, a calm strength, quiet and steady. It had shaken her. She turned off the lights and went to bed, trying to forget the way he'd said his daughter's name, like it was a prayer. 2 nights later, fate refused to stay quiet. It was 9:15 when Olaf's phone buzzed at work. He was pushing his cleaning cart down the glass corridor of Cooper Financial's 48th floor when he saw the message from his sister, "Can you pick up Laya tonight? Emergency at work." He sighed. It meant another late bus, another scramble. As he stepped into the elevator, he caught sight of his reflection in the mirror. Bright doors, worn uniform, tired eyes, hands still rough from bleach and detergent. A man surviving on scraps of peace. The elevator stopped at the 50th floor. The door slid open, and standing there, framed by the sterile corporate light, was her. Mariana. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. She wasn't wearing the usual armor of power tonight. No sharp blazer, no diamond earrings. Just a cream blouse and exhaustion. "Mr. Green," she said quietly. He blinked. "Ms. Cooper, I was hoping to see you." He froze, confused. "You were?" "Yes." She hesitated, then added, "About the other night. I owe you an apology." "You don't." "I do," she insisted. "I should have walked away sooner. I should have." He stopped her with a small shake of his head. It wasn't your fault. Silence stretched between them, charged, delicate. She studied his face, the faint scar above his brow, the way his eyes seemed too kind for the world he lived in. Then softly, "You have a daughter?" He nodded. "So do I." Something cracked open in the air between them, something that wasn't professional, wasn't polite. It was personal, raw, and real. For the first time, she told someone the truth she had hidden behind press releases and polished smiles. She doesn't speak anymore. He didn't ask why. He didn't say he was sorry. He simply said, "That must hurt." And that was somehow worse and better than sympathy. The elevator chimed. She should have stepped out, but she didn't. Instead, she looked at him with an expression he couldn't name. "Would you ever consider meeting her?" Olaf's breath caught. "Your daughter?" "Yes. I'm just a janitor." Her reply was almost a whisper. "You're not just anything." When the doors opened again, she stepped out into the quiet hallway, leaving him staring after her, his heart pounding, his mind reeling. That night, while Chicago slept, a storm began to gather between two cities, Manhattan and the South Side. Two people bound, not by status, but by the echo of pain and the fragile possibility of healing. And somewhere in that space between them, something new had started to breathe. The sound of rain against the office windows was soft, but relentless. The kind that blurred the edges of the city and made Manhattan look like it was holding its breath. Olaf Green stood in the empty corridor of Cooper Financial, the faint hum of fluorescent lights echoing above him. He'd just finished cleaning the executive lounge, the smell of lemon polish still clinging to his hands. But his mind was far from his work. It kept replaying the same moment, Mariana's voice in that elevator, quiet, but trembling with something raw. "Would you ever consider meeting her?" It wasn't a command. It wasn't even a request from a CEO. It was a plea from a mother. And that difference somehow had undone him. He shouldn't have said yes. Every instinct told him to stay invisible, to live his small, safe life, and keep the past buried. But when she looked at him, she reminded him of the version of himself he used to be, the man who believed he could fix broken things. By the time he returned home to South Chicago that night, the sky had cleared. Leia was still awake, sitting cross-legged on the couch in her pajamas, a half-eaten cookie in her hand. "You're late," she said, her tone the perfect imitation of her mother's old teasing voice. "I know." He sighed, setting down his bag. The office was a mess tonight. She scrunched her nose. "You look sad again." He smiled faintly. "I think someone asked me for help." "Then you should help them." He froze at the simplicity of her answer. Children didn't know fear the way adults did. They didn't understand the weight of failure, or how heavy guilt could grow when you'd once promised to save people and couldn't. "Sometimes helping hurts," he said softly. "Only if you stop halfway." She replied with certainty, then yawned. "Can I sleep in your bed tonight?" He nodded. When she curled beside him, minutes later, her small hand finding his, he wondered if life ever stopped asking for second chances, or if sometimes it simply sent them disguised as people you didn't expect. The next evening, he found himself standing in front of a penthouse door in Manhattan, holding nothing but a nervous heart and a canvas tote filled with crayons and smooth river stones. The hallway outside Mariana's apartment was silent, but when she opened the door, it was like stepping into another world. Everything gleamed white, marble floors, silver-framed art furniture, arranged with obsessive precision. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a statement. "Mr. Green," she greeted, her voice a mix of hesitation and formality. Tonight she wasn't wearing the armor of her power suit. A soft cashmere sweater fell loosely over her shoulders. her curls tied back in an effortless bun. But her eyes, those commanding, searching eyes, seemed unsure for once. "Thank you for coming," she added. He nodded, stepping inside. "Thank you for asking." Mariana led him through the vast living room. The city glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, like a living painting. But amidst all the beauty, the air was too quiet. Even the sound of their footsteps seemed intrusive. Maya sat on a plush white rug, surrounded by untouched toys. She was smaller than Olaf, imagined, slender, delicate, with soft brown curls and eyes that held a sadness too old for her age. When she looked up, she didn't flinch or smile. She simply studied him, as if trying to decide whether he was real. "This is Maya Mariana," said gently, kneeling beside her. "Sweetheart, this is my friend." The hesitation in that last word didn't escape him. She wasn't sure what to call him, employee, stranger, miracle. Olaf crouched down, keeping a careful distance. "Hi, Maya," he said softly. "You like drawing?" She didn't respond. Her gaze flicked to her mother, then back to him, her small fingers tightening around a blue crayon. "It's okay," he said, his voice calm, patient. "You don't have to say anything. We can just sit." Mariana hovered near the kitchen island, wringing her hands. "She doesn't usually like strangers," she said quietly. "I'm not a stranger," Olaf said without looking up. "I'm just someone who brought rocks." Maya's eyes moved to the tote bag at his side. He reached in, pulling out a smooth stone and a single red crayon. Slowly, deliberately, he began to draw on the rock, a lopsided star, the kind only a child could love. Then he pushed it an inch closer to her. No words, no pressure, just a quiet offering. For a long time, she didn't move. Then carefully, she reached for the red crayon. But instead of the stone, she drew a line on the floor, straight between them. Olaf smiled. "Okay," he whispered. "That's fair." He drew a line on his side of the floor, mirroring hers. Two separate worlds connected by color. Mariana had gone utterly still, her breath caught somewhere between disbelief and hope. She hadn't seen Maya engage like this in months. Not with teachers, not with therapists. Olaf didn't look at her. He didn't look at anything but the little girl and the crayon in her hand. He knew the silence she lived in. It wasn't absence, it was protection. A fortress built from fear. When the hour ended, he stood slowly, careful not to break the fragile thread between them. "I'll go now," he said softly. Mariana followed him to the door. Her expression was unreadable. "That was more than I expected." He shrugged lightly. "Sometimes silence needs company, not correction." "Do you think you could come again?" she asked, the hope in her voice barely contained. He hesitated. "I'll think about it. Please." The word slipped out before she could stop it. She wasn't begging as a CEO. She was begging as a mother. "I'll see what I can do," he said finally, and left. When the door clicked shut behind him, Mariana stood for a long moment in the foyer, her reflection trembling in the glass. Then she turned and found Maya sitting exactly where she'd left her. But now there was a new drawing on the floor. 2 stars, one red, one blue, their lines touching. That night when she tucked her daughter into bed, Maya clutched that stone in her small fist. Mariana kissed her forehead, whispering, "Thank you, my love," even though she didn't expect a reply. But just as she turned to leave, a sound barely audible made her freeze. A single hum. Not a word, not a sentence, just the soft vibration of a child trying to find her voice again. Mariana pressed her hand to her mouth, tears stinging her eyes. She wanted to run after Olaf to tell him to beg him never to stop coming. But she didn't know where he went after work or how to reach him. Meanwhile, miles away, Olaf sat at his kitchen table, staring at the stone she hadn't touched, the one he'd drawn on for himself. The lopsided star looked foolish now, but somehow sacred. He thought of Sarah again, his wife, her voice gentle and teasing. You see the light in everyone, Olaf, but you never think you deserve it. He rubbed his thumb across the stone, his chest tightening. The truth was helping Maya scared him, because every time he saw her, he saw all the children he hadn't saved, every failure, every memory of the hospital rooms where his magic had stopped working. But there was something about that little girl's silence that wouldn't leave him. It called to him like a ghost, asking not to be forgotten. The next morning, when he arrived at work, the receptionist handed him an envelope. No return name, no signature. Inside was a handwritten note. You made her smile last night. That hasn't happened in a year. Please come again. M. He folded the letter slowly, his pulse steady but his mind racing. He shouldn't get involved. He'd promised himself never to step back into that world. But maybe, just maybe, this wasn't about saving someone else. Maybe it was about remembering how to save himself. Outside, the city began to wake yellow cabs, honking, the sun cutting through low clouds. Manhattan shaking off the rain. Olaf slipped the note into his pocket and pushed his cart down the hallway, the wheels squeaking against the polished floor. For the first time in years, the sound didn't bother him. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he could still hear that faint hum, the voice of a little girl on the verge of finding herself again. And he realized with quiet certainty that he would go back. Not for Mariana's money, not for pride, but for the tiny sound that had cracked open the silence of two lives. The sound that reminded him that even broken voices could become beautiful again. The following Sunday dawned gray over Manhattan, the kind of morning that smelled like rain, even when the clouds refused to open. Olaf Green stood outside the wrought iron gates of Lincoln Park, clutching a paper cup of coffee gone lukewarm. He had no real reason to be there, at least that's what he told himself. Yet something had drawn him out of Chicago before dawn, across states and hours, toward a city that still made him feel like an imposter every time he breathed its air. He didn't call. He didn't tell her he was coming. Maybe he just needed to see for himself that last night hadn't been a dream, that the little girl who'd drawn a red line on the floor was real, and that her mother's eyes had truly softened when she'd whispered, "Please." The park was alive with Sunday sounds, children squealing on swings, the metallic hum of a carousel, the soft chatter of parents watching from benches. He felt out of place in his faded jacket and worn jeans, a man from another world, standing in the middle of a postcard. Then he saw them. Mariana Cooper, dressed simply for once in a light denim jacket and black leggings, stood beside the carousel, holding her daughter's hand. Maya's curls bounced as she watched the spinning horses with quiet fascination. The girl's small fingers clung to her mother's, but her face was open, curious. She looked different, brighter. Mariana spotted him before he could decide whether to leave. Their eyes met across the park, and for a second, something raw passed between them. Surprise, relief, maybe even gratitude. She whispered something to Maya, who turned, recognized him instantly, and smiled a small, shy smile that reached her eyes. That was all it took. He walked toward them, his heart thudding like it had no rhythm left to follow. "You came," Mariana said, when he stopped a few feet away. "I was in the neighborhood." He lied gently. In the neighborhood, she repeated, one eyebrow arching. That's quite a neighborhood to travel from. He smiled, embarrassed. I needed some air. Her expression softened. Then you picked the right morning. The wind picked up rustling the early spring leaves. Maya tugged her mother's hand and pointed toward the carousel. Mariana bent down, listening to the silent insistence in her daughter's eyes, then nodded. Would you like to join her? She asked, turning back to Olaf. Me. You're the only magician she knows, she said lightly, then added, and she refuses to go without you. He blinked, unsure whether to laugh or melt under the warmth of that sentence. I, haven't ridden one of those since I was 7. Then you're long overdue. A moment later, he was seated beside Maya, on a painted horse, the carousel music twirling around them in tinny nostalgia. Maya's tiny hands clutched the pole as Olaf gently guided her balance. The world blurred in color and motion, and for the first time in a long while, he heard laughter, soft, pure, spilling from a child who hadn't made a sound in over a year. Mariana watched from the edge, one hand pressed to her mouth. Her heart thudded against her ribs so hard she thought it might break them. The sight was surreal, the janitor from her company. The man everyone dismissed, coaxing laughter out of her daughter with nothing but patience and presence. When the carousel slowed, Maya leaned against Olaf's arm, content and calm. Mariana approached, kneeling beside her daughter. Sweetheart, did you have fun? Maya nodded, then very faintly mouthed a single word. Yes. It wasn't a sound, just a shape of lips, but it was there. Mariana's eyes burned. Thank you, she whispered to Olaf. He shook his head. Don't thank me. But she did anyway, with a look that lingered far too long for a woman who swore she'd locked her heart away. They ended up walking through the park together afterward, the girls running ahead, their laughter threading through the rustle of trees. Olaf told her about Laya, how she collected bottle caps and believed every bird had a secret language. Mariana listened with quiet fascination, occasionally glancing at him when she thought he wouldn't notice. He spoke like a man who'd learned to measure his words, who used silence as punctuation instead of fear. And somewhere between the benches and the lake, she realized she liked that about him. I did some reading, she said after a while, trying to sound casual, about selective mutism. He looked at her. And they say it's not about the voice. It's about safety. Children stop speaking when they don't feel safe. He nodded slowly. That's true. So what you did for her, it wasn't therapy. It was safety. He didn't reply right away. Instead, he watched Maya and Leia play with a paper boat near the fountain. I used to think healing was about fixing things, he said finally. But sometimes it's just about sitting beside the broken pieces and not walking away. His words hung in the air like something sacred. When they parted that afternoon, the city was bathed in gold. Maya hugged him briefly before running to her mother's car. Mariana lingered beside him, the wind tugging at the strands of her hair. I don't usually let people in, she said quietly, especially not into this part of my life. He smiled faintly. Then why did you? She hesitated, eyes softening. Because for the first time, someone walked in without asking for anything. Before he could respond, her driver opened the car door. She hesitated again, then said, Would you come by the penthouse tomorrow? Maybe around 6 I'll have dinner ready. He wanted to say no. He wanted to remind her that their worlds didn't mix, that janitors and CEOs lived on opposite sides of glass. But then she smiled, and the word no vanished from his vocabulary. I'll be there, he said simply. That night, after putting Leia to bed, he sat by the window, the city stretching beneath him in a web of light. For the first time in years, he didn't feel tired. The ache that had lived in his chest since Sarah's death had quieted, replaced by something fragile but alive. Across the skyline, in a penthouse glowing with warm light, Mariana stood by her own window holding a glass of wine she'd forgotten to drink. Maya was asleep, clutching the red and blue stones Olaf had brought. The apartment felt different tonight, less sterile, less lonely. She thought of the way he'd knelt beside her daughter without hesitation, the way his voice carried calm, even when hers trembled. There was something about him that unsettled her. In the gentlest way, he made her feel seen, in places she didn't want anyone to look. She'd spent her whole life building walls made of success, layering them higher every year, until no one could touch her. But today, in a park full of laughter and spinning horses, a janitor had stepped right through them, without force, without asking, just by being there. As the clock struck midnight, she found herself scrolling through her phone again. The company directory still showed his name in gray letters, Green Olaf. Custodial services. She should have closed it. She should have gone to sleep. Instead, she whispered into the quiet apartment, "You're not just a janitor." The next day, Olaf arrived at the penthouse right on time. Maya opened the door before her mother could, holding a drawing, a clumsy sketch of 3 stick figures holding hands, her mother, and him. He crouched down, smiling. "Is that me?" She nodded shyly. Mariana appeared behind her daughter, apron tied loosely around her waist. The smell of roasted herbs filled the air, unfamiliar, yet comforting. She looked at him with that same expression from the park, a mixture of strength and something perilously close to tenderness. "Dinner's ready," she said, and this time no jokes, no cameras. He stepped inside, and as the door closed behind him, the city outside faded into a soft hum. Inside, there was laughter waiting, and something that might have been the beginning of belonging. Neither of them knew it yet, but the moment she opened that door, their lives had already crossed the point of no return. The night smelled of rosemary and slow-cooked dreams. Olaf stood awkwardly in the doorway of Mariana Cooper's penthouse, clutching a small potted plant in his hand, the only thing he could think to bring that wasn't flowers or wine. The plant was modest, a basil sprig in a chipped ceramic pot, but to him it meant something alive, something growing. He wasn't sure what she'd think of it. Mariana looked at it for a beat too long before smiling faintly. A gift. He nodded. For the kitchen. Or the balcony. It keeps mosquitoes away. Her lips curved. Practical. I like that. He relaxed just a little. Maya came running in from the living room, curls, bouncing, holding one of her painted stones. She offered it to him solemnly, a blue one this time, with a streak of gold across the center. "For me?" Olaf asked. She nodded, grinning shyly, before disappearing again behind the couch. Mariana watched the exchange, her eyes softening. She's been painting all week, the stones, the walls, the table. Art is good for her, he said, following her into the open kitchen. It's a language without pressure. It lets her talk before she's ready to use words. She stirred the pot on the stove, the light catching the small diamond at her wrist. "You sound like a teacher again." "I used to be one," he murmured, his voice almost lost beneath the simmer. She turned. "You never told me that." He shrugged. "There's a lot I don't talk about." Their eyes met for a moment that felt longer than it should have. Dinner was quiet at first. The clinking of silverware, the hum of the city far below, the soft sound of Maya humming to herself as she drew on her napkin. Mariana poured wine, then hesitated. "Do you drink?" "Not anymore." "Because of your daughter? Because of my past?" The words were simple, but the way he said them left no room for curiosity. She nodded, respecting the boundary. They spoke instead about the little things, Leia's favorite songs, Maya's progress in therapy, how impossible New York parking was. Every now and then, their fingers brushed accidentally over the table. Once when she passed him the bread, once when he steadied her glass. Both times, neither of them looked away fast enough. Halfway through dinner, the lights flickered. A storm had rolled in over the Hudson dark clouds, swallowing the skyline. Lightning flashed like camera shutters against the glass walls, followed by the deep, distant rumble of thunder. Maya squealed softly, both frightened and thrilled. "It's okay," Olaf said gently, crouching beside her. "The sky's just having a little argument with itself." She giggled. He picked up the crayon from her hand and drew a tiny sun beside the clouds on her napkin. "See, it's still up there, waiting its turn." Mariana watched them, something tightening in her chest. It had been so long since her daughter had smiled through a storm. But the next flash of lightning plunged the penthouse into sudden darkness. The power was out. The city below turned to a sea of dim emergency lights and reflections. Maya whimpered and reached for her mother. "It's all right," Mariana whispered, holding her close. "It'll come back in a minute." Olaf stood moving with calm precision, as if he'd done this 1,000 times. "Do you have candles?" "Top drawer near the stove," she said. He found them, easily lighting one after another. Soon the room glowed in amber warmth, soft and trembling. The storm outside no longer looked violent. It looked alive. Mariana sat back, her daughter still curled in her lap. The flickering light painted shadows across Olaf's face, highlighting the quiet lines, carved by loss and endurance. "You're good in a crisis," she said softly. "I've had practice," he replied, his tone unreadable. They sat like that for a long while. 3 people wrapped in candlelight, the city storming outside their glass walls. Eventually, Maya drifted to sleep, her head resting against her mother's shoulder. Olaf rose to help her carry the child to bed, but Mariana shook her head. "I've got her. Stay." She disappeared down the hall, leaving him alone in the living room. He wandered toward the balcony doors, drawn by the rhythm of rain tapping against glass. The city stretched out beneath him, silver veins of light thunder rolling across the sky like a heartbeat, too big for one chest to hold. When Mariana returned, she was barefoot, her hair down, the storm reflected in her eyes. "She's asleep," she whispered. He turned toward her, and for a heartbeat, neither spoke. The silence was thick, but not empty. It carried everything they hadn't said, the gratitude, the exhaustion, the pull neither dared to name. She stepped closer, the hem of her satin dress whispering against the floor. "You don't talk much about your life," before she said quietly. "Before the company, before the janitor's uniform. There's not much worth talking about. I don't believe that." He looked at her then, and something in his face shifted, a wall breaking, just slightly. "I used to work with children," he said. "Speech therapy, autism trauma cases mostly. I loved it. I thought I was good at it." Her breath hitched. "What happened?" "My wife got sick," he said simply. "Cancer. By the time we found out, it was too late. I kept working through it, thinking if I could fix other people's kids, maybe I wouldn't lose mine." "Yours?" she asked softly. "Leia was 5 when her mother died," he continued. "Stopped talking for almost a year. I tried everything I'd ever taught other parents. Nothing worked. I lost my wife. I almost lost her too. After that, I couldn't go back. Every time I heard silence in a room, I heard my daughter's." He stopped the storm, filling the spaces his words couldn't reach. Mariana's throat tightened. She had spent years surrounded by men who boasted about what they'd achieved. She had never met one who could bear his losses like this quietly, without pity, without trying to make them sound noble. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He smiled faintly. Don't be. She speaks now. Too much sometimes. She laughed softly, the sound trembling between them. I can't imagine that being a bad thing. It's not, he said. It's everything. They stood near the balcony doors, the candlelight flickering between them. Outside, lightning split the sky open again, white and merciless. She looked at him through, it really looked, and saw not just the man who'd helped her daughter, but the man who'd been broken and still found the courage to stay kind. Without realizing it, she took a step closer. Her hand brushed his sleeve. He didn't move away. Why do you keep helping us? She asked, her voice barely audible. He met her gaze. Because somewhere along the way, you stopped being us and started being you. The confession hung between them, like the storm itself, dangerous, impossible, undeniable. She opened her mouth to respond, but thunder cracked overhead, shaking the windows. Instinctively, she flinched. He reached out, steadying her by the arm. The contact was electric. Her skin burned under his touch. When the noise faded, they didn't let go. She looked up at him, her pulse visible in her throat. You shouldn't say things like that. Then stop looking at me like this, he said quietly. For a moment, the world shrank to candlelight and the faint scent of her perfume. She wanted to step back to remind herself that she was Mariana Cooper, CEO, controlled, unshakable. But the truth was, she hadn't felt this alive in years. Her hand slipped from his sleeve, brushing against his chest, before she caught herself. Good night, Mr. Green. His voice was rough. Good night, Ms. Cooper. She walked away quickly, her heart racing, but at the edge of the hallway, she paused and looked back. He was still standing there, framed by candlelight, his face unreadable, but his eyes full of something she didn't dare name. When the storm finally passed and the power returned, the apartment was quiet again. But the air between them had changed. Something had begun, something neither of them could control, and though neither said it out loud, both knew that the silence that had once protected them was about to become the very thing that betrayed them. The days that followed moved with a rhythm neither of them understood, but both refused to disturb. Olaf came to the penthouse every Tuesday and Thursday evening, as agreed. Officially, he was there to help Maya, drawing, painting, reading stories in gentle tones. But somewhere between the crayons and the candlelight, something else had begun to bloom. It wasn't a relationship. Not yet. It was more like the quiet warmth that grows between two people who have forgotten what it feels like to be truly seen. Maya had begun to talk, not in full sentences, but in fragments that carried the weight of small miracles. Words like blue moon and mommy came haltingly, each one a victory that left Mariana blinking back tears she refused to shed in front of anyone. Olaf never celebrated too loudly. He only nodded, smiled softly, and said, "That's good. We'll try again tomorrow." Every evening when he left, there was a hush that settled in the apartment. Mariana would stand by the door long after it closed, listening to the fading sound of his footsteps. The silence that used to comfort her now felt like an absence she didn't know how to fill. But for every quiet miracle, something darker was stirring beneath. Gregory Pike, the man whose cruelty had once set this story in motion, was still at the company, and he hadn't forgotten the humiliation at that restaurant. When he learned that the janitor was now a regular visitor to the CEO's penthouse, his resentment curdled into obsession. He started watching, listening, waiting for an opportunity. One evening, as Olaf pushed his cleaning cart down the marble corridor of the 47th floor, he felt the weight of eyes on his back. He turned. Gregory stood leaning against a wall, hands in his pockets, smirking. "You've come a long way from mopping floors, haven't you?" Green Olaf ignored him, but Gregory stepped closer. What's your secret? Do you always climb the corporate ladder through the CEO's bedroom? The words landed like a slap. Olaf's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The restraint in his silence only seemed to amuse Gregory more. Be careful, Gregory continued. People talk, especially when the janitor starts playing house with the boss. Olaf turned to face him, his voice steady but laced with warning. I'm not playing anything. Watch your mouth. Gregory laughed, low and cruel. Oh, I'll watch. Maybe I'll even record. That night, Olaf drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel so hard, his knuckles turned white. He didn't tell Mariana. He didn't want to pull her into the filth of someone else's hatred. But the next day, when he returned to the penthouse, his guard was higher than before. Mariana noticed immediately. He was quieter, distracted, his eyes flicking toward the windows as though someone might be watching. Olaf, she said finally, after Maya had gone to bed. What's wrong? He hesitated. Nothing you need to worry about. That's not an answer. He exhaled, looking away. Gregory Pike. He's still angry about that night. He's been making comments. Her voice hardened. What kind of comments? The kind meant to provoke, he said quietly. But it's fine. I've dealt with worse. It's not fine, she snapped. He's harassing you. He met her eyes. I don't want to make things harder for you at work. Harder for me. She laughed bitterly. Do you think I care about boardroom whispers more than I care about what's right? Her anger burned bright and fast. But beneath it was fear of how quickly a woman in her position could lose control of a narrative. She turned away, pacing. He's looking for a scandal, she said. And if he doesn't find one, he'll invent it. He reached for her arm gently. Then we won't give him one. She stopped, meeting his gaze. There was a question in her eyes she didn't dare ask. And what are we then, if not already halfway there? The room was too quiet. The city lights pulsed against the glass, like distant heartbeats. She sat down on the couch, exhaling slowly. Tell me about your wife, she said suddenly. The question startled him. He hadn't spoken of Sarah in months. Why? Because I want to know the man who's helping my daughter speak again, not just the parts that fit into the story. He sank into the armchair opposite her, his voice low. She was kind. She laughed too loud. She never met a stranger. When she got sick, she still smiled more than I did. And you loved her. He looked down at his hands. I still do, just differently now. Mariana nodded slowly. That's possible. Yes, he said, because love doesn't end. It changes shape. The words settled between them like smoke, soft, lingering, impossible to breathe around. Outside, thunder rolled again, echoing off the skyscrapers. Mariana leaned back, eyes on the ceiling. I haven't believed in love for a long time, she murmured. Not since Maya's father. He looked up. What happened? She gave a small, humorless smile. He liked the idea of me more than the reality. The woman who ran companies, not the one who came home exhausted and still had to be strong for a child. He left when Maya stopped speaking. Said the silence was too much. Olaf's heart clenched. He walked away when you needed him most. She laughed softly. And you stayed when you didn't have to. He didn't know what to do with that sentence, with the weight of what it meant. He wanted to tell her that he wasn't a savior, that he was just a man trying to make amends for the things he couldn't fix. But when she looked at him, like that, eyes, tender voice, trembling words, failed him. The thunder grew louder, the storm crawling closer. Mariana rose and crossed the room to close the window. The rain came down in silver streaks reflected in the glass. For a moment she stood there, her silhouette outlined by lightning. He found himself standing too drawn to her, without thinking. Mariana, he said softly. She turned, startled by the way her name sounded in his mouth, informal, unguarded. He was closer than she'd realized. Too close. You should go, she whispered. I will, he said. But he didn't move. For one suspended heartbeat, the air crackled with the same energy that lived outside the glass. Every line between them blurred, boss and employee, mother and father, grief and rebirth. He could feel the pulse in her wrist, where his fingers brushed, could see the flicker of hesitation in her eyes. Then, as if the storm itself decided to break the spell, a knock sounded at the door. Sharp, unwelcome. Mariana flinched and stepped back. Olaf turned. Gregory Pike stood in the doorway, drenched from the rain, a false smile on his lips and a phone in his hand. Sorry to interrupt, he drawled, his eyes gleaming. I was just in the building and thought I'd drop by. Didn't realize you were entertaining. Olaf's body went rigid. You shouldn't be here. Gregory raised his brows. I could say the same about you, Janitor. He lifted his phone slightly enough to let the screen glow between them. Funny thing about these city view penthouses, lots of reflective glass. Makes for great photos. Mariana's voice was ice. Put the phone down. He smirked. Relax. I'm sure the board will find this all very enlightening. Before Olaf could react, Mariana strode forward, snatched the phone from his hand, and hurled it toward the floor. It shattered against the marble pieces, scattering like broken intentions. Get out, she said, her voice steady but shaking beneath it. Gregory's smirk faltered. You'll regret that. No, she said. You will. He left without another word, the storm swallowing him as the door slammed behind him. The silence that followed was deafening. Olaf turned toward her, ready to speak, but she raised a hand. Don't, she whispered. Not tonight. He nodded once, understanding too well. When he finally left, the city was still weeping. In his pocket he carried the blue stone Maya had given him, the one streaked with gold. He didn't know why he kept touching it, except that it reminded him that even fragile things could shine under pressure. Back in the penthouse, Mariana stood alone by the window, rain streaking the glass like tears. She had faced boardrooms, scandals, losses, but tonight felt different. Tonight she'd realized that the greatest danger wasn't the storm outside. It was the one quietly blooming in her heart every time she said his name. Morning came with the pale light of defeat. The storm had passed, but its memory lingered over Manhattan like bruises in the clouds. Mariana Cooper stood before her floor-to-ceiling window, a cup of untouched coffee cooling in her hand. Down below, the city was already moving taxis, honking people rushing the world, pretending that nothing had happened. But she knew something had changed, something irreversible. On her marble counter lay the shattered remains of Gregory Pike's phone. She had swept it into a neat pile the night before, but the sight of it made her stomach twist. Every piece was a reminder of how close she had come to losing everything, and how much she already stood to lose. In another part of the city, Olaf Green tied his work boots with slow, deliberate motions. His daughter Leia sat at the kitchen table drawing stars with her crayons. She looked up at him with the quiet knowing of a child who senses what adults try to hide. You're sad again, she said softly. He forced a smile. Just tired, sweetheart. You were with her. He paused, the question sharper than it should have been. Who? The lady with the pretty hair. The one you said needed your help. He sat beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Yes, I was. Did you help her? His throat tightened. I don't know. Leia considered that, then pressed a yellow crayon into his palm. For when you're sad, it's the color of the sun. He looked at her small paint-stained fingers and realized she was the reason he couldn't afford to fall apart. Whatever was happening with Mariana, he had to keep it from swallowing him whole. By the time he arrived at Ellison Tower, the air in the building was tense. Conversations halted when he entered the hallway. He could feel eyes following him, whispers sliding like knives along the walls. Something had spread, something poisonous. It didn't take long to find out what. In the break room, a group of employees huddled around a phone. One of them, young nervous, glanced up as Olaf passed and quickly lowered the screen. But not fast enough. Olaf caught a glimpse of the image, him and Mariana standing too close in her penthouse, framed by candlelight and rain-streaked glass. His blood ran cold. He didn't remember the photo being taken, but Gregory had said something about reflections. He'd meant it. Somehow, through some trick of angle and malice, he had captured that moment and twisted it into a weapon. Before Olaf could react, a voice called from behind him. "Mr. Green." He turned. It was Security Chief Henderson. His expression was neutral professional. "Ms. Cooper would like to see you. Now." The elevator ride to the 50th floor felt longer than any he'd taken before. When the doors opened, the air was crisp with tension. Mariana's assistant avoided his eyes as she gestured him toward the glass office. Inside, Mariana stood with her back to him, staring out at the skyline. The blinds were half drawn, cutting the sunlight into sharp stripes across her face. When she spoke, her voice was low, controlled. Too controlled. "You've seen it." "Yes, I thought I could contain it," she said quietly. "But it's everywhere. The image, the rumors." She turned to him then, and the exhaustion in her eyes hit harder than any accusation could. "The board has called an emergency meeting. They want an explanation." He swallowed. "You don't owe them one." "Oh, but I do," she said, a bitter edge in her tone. "I've spent 15 years building a reputation out of steel, and now one photo, one moment, might destroy it." Olaf took a step closer. "Mariana, we didn't do anything wrong." "Do you think they care?" she snapped. "Do you think anyone will look at that photo and see two people standing too close because of something innocent? Or will they see a scandal? A CEO compromised, a woman who doesn't know how to keep her professional and personal life separate." Her words hung there sharp and final. He clenched his fists. "If you're asking whether I regret being there, no. I don't." She looked at him, and for a heartbeat, something flickered behind her anger-fear. "Don't say that here," she whispered. "Not where anyone can hear." He shook his head. "I don't care who hears. I care about what's true." "What's true," she said quietly, "is that I'm about to walk into a boardroom full of men waiting to tear me apart. They won't care about truth. They'll care about control." He wanted to reach for her, to tell her she didn't have to face them alone. But the distance between them was now filled with something heavier than pride. It was the cost of being seen together. When she left for the board meeting, he stood alone in her office, staring at the skyline that had once seemed infinite. Now, it felt like a cage made of glass. The meeting lasted hours. Rumors filtered down the building like smoke. By noon, word spread Mariana had been asked to step aside temporarily pending review. It was a polite corporate execution. Olaf waited until nightfall before he went to see her. He found her at home, the penthouse dark, except for a single lamp in the corner. Maya slept on the couch, curled up under a blanket, her small hand still holding one of her stones. Mariana stood by the kitchen counter, a glass of untouched wine in her hand. She didn't look up when he entered. "You shouldn't be here." He closed the door behind him. "I had to make sure you were okay." "Okay." She gave a hollow laugh. They took everything, Olaf. My position, my projects, my dignity. And for what? Because someone wanted a picture that told a story I never lived. He stepped closer. Then we fight back. Her head snapped up. Against who? A system built to believe men like Gregory and doubt women like me. He didn't answer. He knew she was right. Her voice cracked. Do you know what they called me in that room? A liability, a distraction. One of them even said, we should have known better than to put a woman with a bleeding heart in charge. He exhaled slowly, his chest tight. You don't deserve this. No one deserves this, she whispered. But it's happening. He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. Don't, she said. You'll make it worse. For both of us. He hesitated. Mariana. Please. Her voice broke on the word. Go. He froze every muscle in his body, screaming to defy her. But then he saw the truth in her eyes. She wasn't rejecting him. She was protecting him. He left without another word. The elevator ride down felt endless. When he reached the lobby, he paused by the glass doors, watching the reflection of the city lights trembling in the rain outside. He could almost hear her voice in his head, the woman who had once commanded boardrooms and storms alike, now breaking under the weight of silence. That night, sleep refused to come. He sat at his kitchen table, the blue and gold stone resting in front of him. The phone rang once, then again. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. He knew it was her. The next morning, headlines flooded the internet. Cooper financial scandal, CEO's private affair rocks Wall Street. Sources say romantic entanglement led to poor judgment. There were no photos of Gregory Pike, no mention of the cruelty that had started it all. Only her face, strong, beautiful, and weaponized. And beneath one of the articles buried deep in the comment section, Olaf saw it, a single anonymous post. She didn't fall. They pushed her. He stared at the words until the screen blurred. Later that evening, as the sun bled into the Hudson, there was a knock on his door. He opened it to find Mariana standing there, her coat soaked from the rain, her eyes swollen but defiant. They fired him, she said simply. Gregory, yes. Security found the original footage. It proved he staged everything. But it doesn't matter. The damage is done. He looked at her, uncertain. Then why are you here? She stepped closer, her voice trembling. Because when everything was falling apart, you were the only thing that didn't feel like a mistake. He exhaled, the tension breaking inside him like a dam. Mariana. But she didn't let him finish. She reached up, her hands trembling as she touched his face. Don't say anything. Just don't. And then she kissed him. Not gently, not carefully, but with the desperate certainty of someone who had lost too much to keep pretending she didn't want this. The world outside roared with thunder again, as if the city itself refused to sleep through what they had just unleashed. For the first time, they didn't resist it. And in that stolen moment between ruin and redemption, everything finally broke just enough to let the light in. The kiss should have ended things, or maybe it should have begun them. But instead, when their lips finally parted, the world didn't explode into clarity. It only deepened into chaos. Rain streaked down the windows behind them, the kind of steady rain that felt like time, trying to wash away a moment it didn't understand. Olaf and Mariana stood frozen in the quiet aftermath, both breathing too hard, both afraid to move first. Mariana's hands trembled where they still touched his face. Her eyes were wide, unreadable, somewhere between panic and relief. I shouldn't have done that, she whispered. He didn't step back. Then why did you? Her throat worked as though words were fighting their way out. Because I'm tired of pretending I don't feel anything. The honesty in her voice cut through him like light through fog. But before he could say a word, she stepped away, wrapping her arms around herself, as if trying to contain everything spilling loose inside. "You should forget that happened," she said, her voice shaking now. "It's not fair to you, to Maya, to my company." He stared at her, stunned by how fast she'd rebuilt her walls. "Fair," he repeated softly. "After everything, you're still thinking about fairness." "It's the only thing keeping me from falling apart," she said. "You don't understand, Olaf. I can't just be with someone. Not now. Not while everything I've built is in pieces." He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "Then let me help you rebuild it." She turned sharply. "No," she said more forcefully this time. "If you stay, people will think the rumors were true. And if they think they're true, they'll never see me as more than the woman who fell for her janitor." Something flickered behind his eyes. Pain, then something colder. "Is that what this is really about? What they'll think?" Her lips parted, but no words came. He waited, and the silence between them stretched like glass ready to shatter. Finally she said it, the truth that had been clawing at her chest for days. "You make me forget who I am, Olaf. And right now, forgetting is dangerous." He took a slow breath, steadying himself. "Then maybe the person you are when you're with me is the one you were supposed to be all along." The words hit her harder than any accusation could. She turned away, blinking fast, as if afraid to let him see her unravel. "You should go," she said again, her voice breaking on the word should. He hesitated. "If I walk out that door, I might not come back." "I know," she whispered. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then quietly he picked up his jacket from the chair, looked at her one last time, and left. When the door closed, the sound echoed through the penthouse, like the final toll of a bell. Mariana sank to the floor, her back against the cold marble, her hands covering her face. For years, she had fought every battle with precision and pride. But this one, this quiet, human, terrifying thing, she didn't know how to win. The next morning, the world outside had already moved on. The scandal had begun to fade from the headlines, replaced by fresher gossip and new market disasters. But inside her, the silence grew heavier. Maya sensed it too. The little girl watched her mother carefully at breakfast, her spoon stirring cereal she didn't eat. "Mommy," she said softly, and Mariana froze at the sound. It was the first time Maya had spoken her name aloud in days. Mariana looked up, her heart swelling and breaking all at once. "Yes, baby. Where's Olaf?" The name fell into the room like a dropped glass. Mariana's throat tightened. He's not coming today." Maya frowned, her voice barely above a whisper. "Did I do something wrong?" "Oh, sweetheart, no." Mariana rushed to her side, pulling her into her arms. "You did everything right. It's just grown-up things are complicated." Maya's small hands clutched at her blouse. "But he makes the stars." Mariana's eyes stung. "I know, darling. I know." That night, after putting Maya to bed, she stood on the balcony, looking out over the glittering grid of Manhattan. The city seemed cruelly indifferent, so alive, so busy, while she stood there unraveling in silence. Her phone buzzed. A message from her assistant board: "Wants to meet Monday. Rumor says they may reinstate you. They need stability, and the Pike scandal's dying down." Stability. That was the word her whole life was built on. But now it sounded like a cage. Across town, Olaf sat in his modest apartment, staring at the blue and gold stone Maya had given him. He turned it over in his hand again and again, the color catching the lamplight like a piece of sky trapped in glass. He told himself he'd done the right thing by walking away, that she needed space, distance, peace. but the truth gnawed at him. Leaving had felt less like sacrifice and more like betrayal. Leia came padding out of her bedroom, sleepy-eyed. "Daddy." He looked up quickly, pocketing the stone. "Hey, kiddo. Couldn't sleep?" She shook her head. "You were talking to the air again." He smiled weakly. "Was I? You said her name." He froze. "She's pretty, right?" Leia said, climbing into his lap. "The lady with the soft voice. You smile different when you talk about her." He wrapped his arms around his daughter, burying his face in her hair. "She's special," he admitted softly. "Then you should go see her," Leia said simply. "When I miss someone, I draw them a picture. Maybe she misses you too." He didn't answer. But later, after she'd fallen asleep, he found himself sketching something he hadn't done since Sarah died. He drew a child's small hand, holding a sugar packet star, dissolving into a droplet moon. When he finished, he folded it neatly and tucked it into his jacket pocket. 2 days passed before fate decided to intervene again. It happened at the foundation meeting, a small charity event for children's trauma therapy where Mariana had been invited to speak as part of her slow return to the public eye. The room was filled with polished smiles and polite applause. Cameras flashed. Investors whispered about recovery and redemption. Mariana stood at the podium, every word measured, every gesture poised. On the surface, she was perfect again. The woman who commanded boardrooms and headlines. But inside, her hands trembled. The speech on the teleprompter blurred into nonsense. All she could think about was a man who had taught her daughter to laugh again using sugar and water. When she reached the final line of her speech, her voice caught. "Healing," she said, "isn't something we can buy or demand. Sometimes it's just the courage to sit beside someone's silence and stay." The audience erupted in applause, but Mariana barely heard it. Her gaze had caught on something near the back of the room, a familiar figure standing just out of the spotlight. Olaf. He looked different. Or maybe it was the light. There was weariness in his eyes, but something steadier too. Something like quiet conviction. After the event, she found him waiting near the exit. Neither spoke for a moment. The world around them moved in slow motion, cameras flashing, guests laughing, but it all felt distant. "You shouldn't be here," she said, finally echoing words she'd said before, though this time they carried no weight. He smiled faintly. "Maybe. But I needed to tell you something." She crossed her arms, trying to seem calm. "What I read your speech," he said. "You talked about staying beside someone's silence. But you never said what happens when the silence isn't theirs. It's yours." She stared at him, her breath catching. "You've been quiet too long, Mariana," he continued softly, "and I think you've forgotten how to let someone stay for you." Her control wavered. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "You have your daughter. Your life. You don't owe me anything." He stepped closer. "You're right. I don't owe you anything. But I want to be here. And that's different." Her lips trembled. "They'll talk again. They'll destroy us both." "Then let them," he said quietly. "I'd rather be ruined standing beside you than whole pretending you don't matter." Something inside her broke. Then, not in pain, but in release. For the first time in years, she stopped fighting. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. She just reached for his hand and held it. They stood there in the dim corridor, hidden from the crowd and the noise, their fingers intertwined, like two survivors clinging to the same piece of wreckage. And for that one fragile moment, it didn't matter that the world outside would keep spinning, judging, whispering. All that mattered was that after everything, the storms, the silence, the distance, they had found each other again. And this time, neither of them moved away. The following weeks unfolded like the slow turning of a page, quietly, cautiously, yet with an undercurrent of something neither of them dared name. The city began to thaw into early summer, and with the change of season came a fragile peace that felt almost too delicate to trust. Mariana Cooper was reinstated as CEO of Cooper Financial, though the board's smiles were thinner, their eyes sharper. They called it a vote of renewed confidence. She called it survival. The headlines had shifted to fresher scandals, newer disasters. But the whispers remained soft, insinuating clinging to her name, like dust that wouldn't wash off. She learned to walk past them with her head held high. What she didn't learn, couldn't quite master, was the art of not thinking about Olaf Green. He hadn't come to her penthouse since that night after the charity event. They still spoke carefully briefly when he came by to see Maya, who was now speaking in full sentences, her words halting but strong. Sometimes when he was leaving, Mariana would catch his reflection in the glass elevator, and something in her chest would ache with unspoken things. One evening, after a long day of board meetings and calculated smiles, she came home to find Maya sitting at the kitchen table drawing. "What are you making, sweetheart?" Maya grinned. "A family." Mariana smiled, kneeling beside her. "Let me see." On the paper were 3 stick figures, one tall woman, one smaller girl, and beside them, a man holding their hands drawn with careful attention, the same blue crayon for his eyes, the same gray for his shirt. Mariana's throat tightened. "He's still your favorite, isn't he?" Maya nodded, serious. "He listens. You both listen now." It was true. Since Olaf had entered their lives, silence had taken on new meaning. It wasn't absence anymore. It was space. It was breath. It was love in disguise. That night, after Maya fell asleep, Mariana poured herself a glass of wine and stood on the balcony. The city was a constellation of lights, vast and glittering, each one reminding her how small human stories really were, and yet how much they could still hurt. She didn't hear the knock on the door at first. When it came again louder this time, she froze. When she opened the door, Olaf stood there, rain-damp and tired, as if he'd walked through the entire city just to reach her. Her voice softened instinctively. "You should have called." "I tried," he said, his voice low. "I wasn't sure you'd answer." She stepped aside. "Come in." He hesitated at the threshold, but she nodded, and he entered. The air between them was charged, tense, like a cord stretched too tightly. "I didn't come here to make things harder," he began, "but I need to tell you something before it finds you another way." She frowned. "What happened?" "I'm leaving Cooper Financial," he said simply. Her heart sank. "What? Why?" He sighed, rubbing a hand across his face. "It's not about you, or Maya. It's about everything else. The looks, the whispers, the pity. I can't keep being the reason people use your name in sentences that start with, 'Did you hear?'" Her eyes flashed. "So you think running fixes it?" "It's not running," he said quietly. "It's protecting what's left of this, whatever this is." "Don't do that," she snapped. "Don't protect me from you." He met her gaze steadily. "Mariana, I've lived most of my life trying to save people. My wife, my daughter, your little girl, you. But saving people isn't the same as loving them, and I don't want to be another man who makes you smaller just because he doesn't know how to stay." Her breath caught. "You think you make me smaller?" He shook his head. "No, but I think you'll have to fight harder if I stay, and I don't want you to keep fighting just to defend me." For a long moment, all she could do was stare at him. Then she turned away, her voice trembling. "You think leaving will make this easier? It won't." You'll just turn into another name, I whisper to the dark when I can't sleep. He took a step closer. Then tell me to stay. She turned to face him. You know I can't. He smiled faintly, but his eyes said everything. I know. Silence stretched between them, long, heavy, and full of all the words neither could say. When he finally reached for her hand, she didn't pull away. His palm was warm, grounding, real. You once told me healing wasn't about fixing things, she whispered, that sometimes it's just staying beside what's broken. He nodded. And sometimes it's knowing when to walk away, so it doesn't break again. The truth of it tore through her. She wanted to scream at him, to beg him to take it back. But she didn't. She just looked at him with eyes that said everything. Her pride wouldn't let her speak. He pressed a kiss to her forehead, lingering there for one heartbeat too long. Then he whispered, Tell Maya I'll still write. And then he was gone. Mariana stood in the doorway staring into the empty hallway. For a moment she thought she heard his footsteps fade, but maybe it was just her own heart breaking. In the weeks that followed, the rhythm of their lives changed again. Olaf found work at a small therapy center in Queens, where the staff didn't care about his past, only his patients. He spent his days helping children find their voices again, the same way he had once helped Maya. But every time one of them smiled, he felt that ache, the missing part of a story that had ended too quietly. Mariana threw herself back into her company. Investors returned, profits rose. On paper, everything was perfect. But in her penthouse at night, she would find small reminders, a crayon on the floor, a folded napkin with a doodled star, a single blue stone left on the balcony rail. She told herself she was fine. She almost believed it. Then one late afternoon, while leaving a board meeting, she saw him again. He was standing on the sidewalk outside the building, helping a group of children cross the street. He hadn't seen her. His sleeves were rolled up, his hair damp from the humidity, his laughter genuine and unguarded. For a moment, she simply watched him, the man who had lost everything and somehow learned how to live anyway. When he turned and saw her, surprise flickered across his face, followed by something gentler. He walked toward her, stopping just close enough that she could smell the rain still clinging to his skin. "Hi?" he said. "Hi?" she echoed. For a long time, neither spoke. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. "Maya made this. She wanted me to give it to you." He took it, smiling faintly. Inside was a crayon drawing of 3 figures again, but this time they were standing under a sun, not rain. At the bottom, in shaky letters, were the words, "Come back soon." He looked up, his voice low. "She's getting good. She misses you." He swallowed hard. "I miss her too." Mariana hesitated. "And me." He looked at her for a long moment, then said softly, "Every day." The city moved around them, impatient, unstoppable, but for a few precious seconds it felt like time had chosen to pause. Then from across the street, one of the children called his name. He gave her a small, sad smile. "I should go." "Olaf," she said, her voice trembling, "if you ever get tired of saving the world." He finished for her. "You'll still be here." She nodded. "Always." He didn't say anything else. He just touched her arm gently, a promise without words, and walked away. As she watched him disappear into the crowd, Mariana realized that love wasn't always about having someone beside you. Sometimes it was about knowing that the part of you they changed would never be the same again. That night she tucked Maya into bed, and her daughter whispered sleepily, "Mommy, when's Olaf coming back?" Mariana brushed a curl from her forehead and smiled softly. "When the stars call him," she said, and outside, The city lights flickered one by one, like tiny stars learning how to speak again after too much silence. The city was waking to spring again, the kind of morning that looked like forgiveness. Manhattan's skyline shimmered under a soft gold haze, and the air smelled faintly of rain and blooming tulips. In the penthouse that once held storms, Mariana Cooper stood by the window with a cup of coffee, her reflection caught between glass and sunlight. 2 years had passed since everything had fallen apart, and somehow everything had quietly rebuilt itself. Cooper Financial was thriving under her leadership again, stronger, steadier, more humane. She had learned to delegate, to breathe, to look people in the eye instead of over them. The scars of the past still whispered in boardrooms and behind glossy headlines, but she had made peace with them. They were proof of survival, not shame. Down the hallway, a soft voice called Mommy Mariana smiled instantly. "In here, sweetheart." Maya appeared taller now, her curls longer, her smile bright. She held a piece of paper behind her back, hiding it the way children hide treasure. "What's that?" Mariana asked, teasing. Maya grinned. "A surprise." Mariana crouched down. "Let me see." The girl pulled out a folded drawing full of color and imagination. A house with a garden, a blue sky with too many stars, and 3 stick figures holding hands. "It's us," Maya explained proudly. "You, me, and Olaf." Mariana's heart skipped. She hadn't heard that name from her daughter's mouth in months. "He used to visit," Maya continued softly, tracing the crayon lines. "Then he stopped because you said he had work far away. But I think he'll come back soon. The stars told me." Mariana swallowed the ache in her chest. "Maybe they're right," she said gently. "Maybe soon." After sending Maya off to school, she lingered by the window again, her eyes drifting across the skyline. She had learned to stop waiting for Olaf, or at least she told herself she had. But there were moments, quiet, ordinary moments, when his absence pressed against her ribs like a heartbeat she couldn't unhear. Then one afternoon in May, it happened. She was in the middle of a presentation when her assistant slipped a note onto the conference table. "Someone's waiting for you in the lobby. Says it's urgent." Mariana frowned. "Who?" The assistant hesitated. He didn't give a name. She excused herself from the meeting, walking briskly through the glass halls. Her heels clicked softly against the marble, echoing in the stillness. And then she saw him. Olaf Green. He was standing near the elevator bank holding a small potted basil plant, just like the one he'd brought her years ago. His hair was flecked with gray now, but his eyes were still the same calm blue that had once steadied her storms. For a second, she couldn't move. Then her voice came out small, disbelieving. "You found me?" He smiled faintly. "You were never lost." The sound of his voice undid her. She walked toward him, every step heavy with the weight of years. "You shouldn't have come here." "The last time I know," he said quietly. "But this isn't like last time. I didn't come to fix anything. I came to tell you I finally stopped running." Her heart stuttered. "Running from what?" "From the idea that love has to be clean," he said. "That it can only happen when everything's perfect. Life isn't perfect, Mariana." "But you—" He paused, his voice catching. "You make it feel like it could be." Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. "You always did know how to say the thing I wasn't ready to hear." He laughed softly. "I had a lot of practice with silence." The air between them shifted as if the city itself were holding its breath. "Do you still live in Queens?" she asked, trying to steady herself. "For now," he said. "But I might not stay. Where will you go?" He looked at her with quiet certainty. "Wherever you are." She blinked, half laughing through her tears. You always did have terrible timing. He grinned. Or maybe the universe finally decided to get it right. Before she could answer, the elevator doors opened behind them, and a small voice called, Mommy. Mariana turned, and there was Maya rushing toward her, curls bouncing, her backpack slipping from one shoulder. I finished school early. They said there was a surprise. She stopped short when she saw Olaf. Her eyes widened. Then, without hesitation, she ran to him. You came back. He knelt, catching her in his arms as she threw herself at him. Hey, sunshine, he whispered. I missed you. You promised you'd write, she said, mock stern. I did, he said, smiling. I just didn't say when I'd deliver the letters. Mariana stood there watching them, her chest tight with something warm and unfamiliar, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years' peace. Later that evening, the three of them sat on the balcony watching the city light up, one window at a time. Olaf had cooked simple food, comforting food, and the air was full of the smell of basil and garlic. Maya was painting again, humming softly under her breath. Olaf leaned back in his chair, watching her with quiet joy. She's changed, he said. She's grown, Mariana replied, but she still keeps her blue stones. She's her mother's daughter, he said, and when she turned toward him, the look in his eyes made her forget how to breathe. Do you ever think about what would have happened if things had gone differently? She asked. He smiled. Every day. But then I remember if they had, maybe I wouldn't have become the man I needed to be to deserve this moment. She looked at him, really looked, and realized he wasn't the man who'd once walked into her life out of nowhere. He was the man who had stayed in her heart when everything else had fallen apart. The city stretched around them like a promise. The wind carried the sound of traffic laughter and the low hum of 1,000 other stories. But for once hers felt finished, not with loss, but with clarity. As the evening deepened, Maya came over holding a small jar filled with glittering pebbles. These are our wishes, she announced proudly. I made one for each of us. She handed one to her mother, one to Olaf, and kept one for herself. What did you wish for? Olaf asked. Maya smiled. Nothing, because I already got it. Mariana's heart swelled. And what's that? Baby? Maya giggled, leaning into Olaf's side. Our family. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of violet and gold. Olaf reached for Mariana's hand, his thumb brushing lightly against her skin. She didn't pull away. They sat like that, three people who had once been broken in different ways, watching the night unfold, no longer afraid of what it might bring. When the first stars appeared, Olaf whispered, Remember what you told her once, that I'd come back when the stars called me. Mariana smiled through her tears. I didn't think they'd call this soon. He leaned in, his voice barely above the wind. They've been calling every night since I left. I just finally listened. She laughed softly, the sound catching in her throat. Then stay. This time stay. He didn't answer with words. He just kissed her slowly, deeply, the way people kiss when they know they've run out of reasons to be afraid. Maya squealed and covered her eyes, giggling. You, Mommy. They broke apart, laughing, and Olaf pulled both of them into his arms. You know, he murmured, for the first time in my life, I think I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. And under the Manhattan night, where sirens wailed, stars shimmered, and new stories waited to begin, they stayed like that, wrapped in a silence that no longer hurt. Because sometimes, love doesn't return as a storm. Sometimes it comes back as sunlight, warm, steady, and certain. Sometimes it takes everything breaking just to remember what it means to be whole. And for Olaf Green and Mariana Cooper, the world had finally stopped breaking. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to share it, to tell someone you believe in second chances, in healing, and in love that finds its way home, no matter how long it takes. Because somewhere out there, someone is still waiting for their morning after winter.